welcome to our Mastermark Interview Series. I'm Sam Lievense, and with me today I have Ziva Narendra from Aviatory Indonesia here to talk about a little bit about a pilot's perspective on bird strikes. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Pleasure to be here.
So in the airport wildlife management industry, there's airport biologists, policymakers, even different people like airport managers that are always talking about bird strikes. But a pilot's perspective, I feel as though it's overlooked a little bit. And they're the first ones on scene when a bird strike happens. So it's really good to have you here today. How long have you been a pilot for?
I want to say better part, almost 30 years. I started training in 97, so 28 years.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. So first question for you. Firstly, have you ever been involved with a bird strike? And if so, from your experience, what goes on in a pilot's mind when that bird strike occurs?
Good question and good subject nonetheless. So again, thanks for having me today. The subject of bird strike didn't occur to a pilot, at least from my experience, even though that we started being exposed to our training very early on to different situations, different scenarios, by design, of course, different environment. We, as a student, we were not made aware or self-aware about the actual possible risk of being struck by birds until we are entering into our professional life as a career pilot, where you are actually being introduced to materials and trainings into possible bird strikes and what could happen, what sort of procedures and SOPs to be done. So from my point of view, I think as far as I can remember, the first time I've encountered a bird during airborne was during my commercial single engine, which I'd done in Central Florida. I was doing a solo flight in a small Cessna 172 single engine piston. I was doing touch and go in one of the local airports. It's very quiet, very slow traffic. A lot of student pilots go there, and it's very, very small regional municipal airport. But we noticed that there were lots of mangroves and ponds surrounding the airport.
Florida,
it's not so far from the coast.
For sure.
But we never really noticed, again, because we had lack of our exposure as a student, that as a subject. But during one of those exercises, I had some very, very small, I'm not quite sure what type of birds those were, but I didn't realize that I got struck. I kept on with my flight training, and as soon as I got back home, parked my aircraft, tied the aircraft down, and there were some spots or a small dent left by the trailing edge of the wing. Only then I realized, okay, well, could this be from debris or something?
Right.
But there were, blotches and spots that could be from, a blunt object.
Right.
Then I asked my flight instructor at the time, and then for the first time that he explained to me that possibly might have been a small bird that struck you. It was during landing, during the final phase of the touch and go, and even then, I didn't realize how important that was until later on when I started working as a professional pilot.
Right. Is that your only bird strike, or?
No, that's actually no, and unfortunately, later on when I started working as a charter pilot, we flew in remote areas, not big airports, and turboprops, smaller planes, 20 passengers, with no controlled airports, no advanced technology. So we would get warnings from the tower guys whenever birds are in the vicinity of the runway. So they would give us enough lead time to just kind of prepare, and they could scare the birds away. But in one of those experiences, I think it was my second year as a first officer, we actually got stricken by a huge bird, like an egret.
Okay.
Almost like that size.
Sure.
That got, it was a propeller turboprop during takeoff, and it struck one of the blades, but it went by so fast, it got sucked into the turbine. So hence it almost disabled the engine.
Right, yeah.
But we were already on our takeoff phase, so then the emergency SOP and protocol started to come into play.
So I guess that goes into my second question for you then. Does the size of the aircraft matter when it comes to strikes? I would assume yes, the smaller engines, there might be a little bit more of a risk when you're hitting a large bird like an egret.
Since the only planes I flew were propellers, I never flew in jets. I never been in an airline environment.
Okay.
But I think the the different factors would lie on types of engine. Whereas if you have a turbojet or turbofan like the airlines do,
Right.
there are nothing that restricts the object from entering the nacelles
Yeah.
and the intake.
Yeah.
So sometimes it would cause significant damage, sometimes no damage at all.
Right.
But in a propeller aircraft or even a helicopter, you still have something that prohibits or minimizes the possibility of the object getting straight into the engine or
Right.
compressor. So it's for me, at least in my point of view, it's not the size of the aircraft, but the type of engine.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So let's say when you hit this egret, the first thing that goes on in your mind is
Panic. I was only I think it was not even my first 1,500 hours. I was flying right seat, of course. It was brightest day, of course. Otherwise, they wouldn't be around. And it was the third sortie of the day, and we were just finishing up our duties. There was late afternoon, pretty much almost like this one, like 2, 3 p.m.
Okay.
But only little did we know that those were actually feeding times for them to find the worms and try to find food. I remember it was, springtime, April, May. It was not quite as dry season.
right.
So the first initial reaction was, of course, shock. But the training kicks in, and knowing that you're not actually flying alone, you have someone next to you, which in my case, was my captain, and you also have your passengers and your crew along with you. So the panic didn't last for long, but then you know that you have to focus on continuing flying the aircraft and trying to navigate as much as possible. And because we were just starting our initial takeoff, we had to circle back to land.
Okay.
That's almost natural, I guess, for any aircraft operations, regardless of the aircraft type.
So is it different for different phases of flight? What the protocol if you hit a bird strike or hit a bird?
Absolutely. I would say that they fall under the same category of abnormal or emergency procedure. But different phases, you are absolutely correct. Different phases would require different steps or SOPs.
Okay. Can you give us a little bit about which phase? What's the protocol?
Well, in my experience, I mean, we experienced an immediate asymmetrical thrust between the two engines, between left and right. We didn't notice immediately in the RPMs or the EGTs, the engine gauge temperature, but we felt a sudden swaying that we felt on our feet. So we had the rudder pedals, and all of a sudden, with this left engine sort of kind of crumples away, and then we knew we had to compensate with the right pedal in order to keep it to fly straight. And after assessing and then looking through the EGT and the RPM of the engine, the instruments did clearly state that there's something. We didn't know it was a bird or anything yet. Could have been, other object, but we knew that the left engine was failing. It had not failed completely just yet. It was still spinning and not yet feathered. But we knew that the left engine was not performing optimally. So we did what pilots know as the engine failure procedure.
Right.
So that sort of maneuver, and just kind of make the most you can to maneuver the aircraft with the limitations, having lost one power.
So you were talking about having a co-pilot with you.
Actually, I was the co-pilot.
You were the co-pilot.
Yes, I was with my captain. He was on the
Okay.
left seat, and it was his side of the engine that died down.
Right, right. Have you ever been just by yourself when a bird strike occurred?
That first experience as a student, the one that dented my wing, and I think there were several other experiences, but because I was not aware of what it was, I was so focused on just kind of, polishing my flying skills, my basic skills. Didn't really pay too much attention
For sure.
for worse, I guess. But yeah, I guess it goes back all the way to my training days.
For sure. Looking back, do you think you were properly trained on how to deal with a bird strike?
Later on, I would say yes, because in an organizational environment, especially in a company where you have KPIs, you have parameters, you have safety standards, and you have exercise, and you have tests,
Right.
and you have to be up to speed and on your toes on these things. And foreign objects, including bird strikes, fall under that category where you have to know actually what you're doing, and they make sure to train you on that.
From your experience, you've flown into larger airports, smaller airports. Do you think the bird strikes happen in more in, let's say, more remote places, or larger airports, or where, I don't know, where are you most looking out for a bird strike, may I say?
Because of the limited scope of my flying career, I only flew for like 5 years, but during that period of flying, I've only been exposed to certain numbers of airports, both large and also small and remote. But from my experience, the smaller ones tend to have more risk and bird population. Not to say also other wildlife that may be present around. But if you talk about, if you talk with other friends from the airlines at larger airports, especially the ones that are nearby the coast, they would vouch for something that's entirely different. Like if you follow the story of the Hudson River landing, that's in vast metropolitan New York.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. I always think that any airport near a body of water, you always have those waterfowl or larger geese and egrets and all that kind of stuff to look out for. But some of the smaller ones, you never know what there could be something like a hornbill, something big.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so let's say you had the bird strike, you land the plane safely. What happens next? Do you have to do reporting or anything like that?
Yes, well, number one, we have to determine how the extent of the damage, and therein lies the difference between if you experience such a thing as a pilot flying for the airline, or in my case, flying for a small charter company.
Sure.
So we didn't have a fleet of so many aircraft, spare aircraft that can be sent and then replace you, and then you take away your passengers and fly back on schedule. So we had to determine and ascertain the extent of the damage, along with the engineers, of course, with the ground people. And if the damage were indeed very, very critical, then we could not continue the flight. So the flight had to be grounded for the day. Parts had to be brought in, and had to do replacements, sometimes on the spot. And that can really disrupt schedule, not only on that day, but on the entire week, if not weeks. But in an airline environment, sometimes it will take hours before your passengers can be put on another flight. The risk exposure here is not just only on safety and time, but also cost.
Yeah.
Like I said, when your plane is grounded and parts have to be brought over, then there is the lead time or the grounded time, which of course equivalent to cost.
Is there somewhat of an investigation, would you say, with the bird strike, or from your experience? I know it might differ from airport to airport, or airline to airline, or pilot to pilot, but did you have to go through any investigation on the bird strike or the damage or anything like that?
Not necessarily investigation, unless if it yields something that might pose risk to life or property. In our case, it didn't cause any damage except to the aircraft, but we were required to submit a report, especially because it disrupts the entire operation. And if you talk to the airlines guys, the same thing, they will have to report. It would not develop into something that's investigative, because it doesn't really violate any regulation. It's actually protocol, and to be able to execute an abnormal or even emergency procedure, ensuring the safety of your occupants, your passengers, and property around you, that's actually a job well done.
Yeah, totally. I guess I have another question. When you do hit that bird, and you've hit almost all of them during takeoff, is that correct? Or also landing?
We weren't quite sure how many birds there were, but they flew in packs.
Okay.
And they would sometimes, not hesitate to come over and straight at you as you, as you were accelerating toward takeoff, or sometimes it was just one big bird.
Right.
I only learned later on that some geese or bird would find planes as intimidating. They have this territorial thing that they saw. Okay, I see a larger bird, and then this is my territory, this is my domain, so I'm going to go
Sure.
straight at it. And that has happened. And historically, if you Google it, there are large bald eagles that go all the way through the cockpit windshield.
Oh, yeah,
even
for
injured
sure.
pilots.
Yeah, yeah.
Or it would break apart along the avionics.
Total. There's some wicked pictures of
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
storks and raptors all going through. Have you had anything like that, like on the windshield, or not necessarily?
Thankfully, no.
Okay,
No.
not yet. Knock on wood.
Not no stories I've heard firsthand, anyways. But
Sure.
I know there are a lot of stories like that around the world.
Right. Another question would be when you're okay, you take off, you hit the bird, you circle back. What is the communication with tower like when that happens?
On that very occasion, I mean, like I said, it's very small, locally controlled tower. It's a small airport. The guy in the tower immediately knew what was going on. He had his binoculars on
Okay.
all the time. They did warn us prior to rolling off. They were trained and required to do so just to make sure that we're aware there's nothing. Otherwise, we would have aborted the takeoff in the first place.
Right.
So they did all in their power to kind of warn us. So of course there will be communications. Okay.
Sure.
We call the flight number or call sign saying that we're experiencing such and such, and our decision is to circle back to land.
Sure.
And especially during takeoff phase, since it's very early and you have the safe vicinity close to the airport, it's only sensible that you land back instead of trying to find an alternative location.
Yeah.
Because at that point, in that phase of flight, the very most critical factor would be your speed, your airspeed especially, to be on a takeoff profile climbing with both engines. That's already have very close to borderline of slow speed where you can easily stall if you maneuver, I would say, in the wrong direction. But it would be twice as hard with one engine.
Totally.
Yeah. So it's like losing 50% of your capacity.
Right. How does that feel? Like on the? Do you really feel it when you're flying the plane?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, the plane in which I experienced that in were old school plane. It was made in 1982. We had hydraulics that
Nice.
sort of aided with some of the controls and whatnot, but mostly it's all mechanical. So you would feel immediately the applied pressure to compensate the loss of power. Even in flying school, without specifically exercising bird strike, you would be trained in single engine procedures if you fly twin engines.
Right.
If you fly single engine and you lose the only sole engine that you have,
Yeah.
then you need just to kind of glide and find a place to land. But if you have two engines, then you would feel that the need to apply counter pressure,
Sure.
especially on your rudder and your aileron, just to make sure that the plane flies straight and you don't lose speed and you don't lose the angle of attack and the rate of climb.
Right. Have you ever had to abort landing because of birds on the runway or anything like that, or not necessarily?
Not birds, but I think it was like a goat on the runway. Yeah, again, it's one of those smaller rural airports in East Indonesia.
There we go.
Those cases happen a lot because they would neighbor along with, let's say, there was a farm or a savanna nearby.
That is good.
Yes.
That's why at Mastermark we always like to call them wildlife strikes instead of bird strikes, because it doesn't discriminate, right? It's not only birds.
It could be
can
anything.
also hit goats, and I know even up in Alaska they hit moose. Down in Florida they hit alligators. So
there you go.
Yeah, definitely something to look out for. You don't want to hit an orangutan.
No, absolutely not. But we have had several close calls in Kalimantan.
Have you really?
Yeah, and it would be much of a headache because they're,
That's so unique.
Yeah.
An
They're protected
orangutan
animals.
strike might be that's a different thing altogether.
Yes.
Wow. They're almost the size of us humans, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
That is cool. Awesome. Okay. So what do you think, like from a pilot's perspective, what do you think airports can do better for pilots when it comes to bird strikes?
That's an interesting question. And I think this is where I, as someone that's in the business side of the industry, having the ability to talk with people such as yourselves and organizations such as Mastermark, to talk with people from the airport, from the regulators, from the airlines even. I think mitigation is the most important key factor, just to kind of address, acknowledge that there is a threat or risks, potential risk happening on a daily basis, and what will be the implications if such risk becomes something that actually occur. What would impact the entire airport ecosystem? So, number one, I think airports would need to address and acknowledge that these issues, whether there be recorded or historical incidents or not, but it's always good to prevent. And number two is to create, I think, some sort of a good cycle of communication with the stakeholders and the users on how to prevent, and just to listen to the airlines, especially, or the operators on their concerns.
Right.
They might have seen or heard something. It may not be significant then, but it may pose risk someday later on.
Yeah, no, that's what I think the pilot's perspective is one of the most important, if not the most important perspective, because you guys are the ones that actually see these bird strikes. I mean, I deal with them every day, but I'm not the one flying into it. So
Absolutely.
I think that's where your perspective is super beneficial and useful for us. Sometimes we can just get in a box of wildlife hazard management without thinking of the people who are actually going up in there and dealing with it.
Absolutely. And you cannot have a dash cam recording that very same incident. And sometimes after a bird strike happens, everything clears up very, very quickly. Those pack of birds won't probably be around. They probably go somewhere else, and witnesses from the ground won't be able to tell whether there actually were birds.
Right.
That's why pilots, especially who have experienced these type of incidents, are very, very prone to questioning and sometimes even doubts, even though there's credibility behind their argument, because they're the one experiencing, and the damage speaks for itself.
Have you heard of any pilots who will refuse to go to certain airports because of birds or bird strikes, or?
Nothing that would allow them to not have to go, especially if it's for work.
Yeah, you gotta do it.
They could address concern. Of course, pilots have the rights to report or submit that they have specific concern. Now, if it's validated, then of course the company would investigate and look into, like I said, mitigating and perhaps put in place something that will minimize the risk.
Right.
But to decline a mission, I think that's
for sure
rarely heard of.
Yeah. From your pilot perspective, what are the airports doing to prevent these, wildlife strikes?
Because I only flew in local airports in Indonesia. Like I mentioned, I've only been exposed to smaller aircraft operations. I've never been flown into larger airport, especially overseas. But some of the methods, at least back then, the typical bird scatter sensors were present, like your traditional motion sensors, and then your bird scatter that put in places along the runway, which is still quite a distance, safe distance. And then you have the the voice sensor and your manual audio thing. I don't know what it's called, but in larger airports, I guess they have marshals that actually go into with their vehicles and try to scare away the birds.
I think from my biologist perspective, the birds are always, or other wildlife, are there for either food, water, or shelter. One of the three that's going to attract the birds.
Right.
So once they're there, I think it's also a little bit, not just the dispersal methods, but also habitat modification and more proactive measures that, that could be netting a canal or pruning a tree or something like that, making the aerodrome a little less attractive, and then that can be very useful for birds to not come in, and easier for you to do your job and fly out of the plane.
If you look from the risk scale, anything from birds or even, birds, of course, naturally, could be in a way of aircraft taking off. And this is actually been reported by pilots.
All right, so we talked about a plethora of different things. We talked about phase of flight, we talked about engine, we talked about what goes on in your head. Are there any key takeaways that you want someone maybe watching to get from this interview?
I think it's always good to acknowledge and address again that the issue of nature is being talked about. As we, there's no scenario where we cannot live without our surroundings. We have to be aware of the surroundings and the community and the ecosystem because it's complementary, right? And but for the general public, I must say that rest assured that pilots are trained to be aware, and it's not only just one-time training. They keep on the recurrent or the refresher training every 6 months or every year, whether it's on a device or simulator or actual aircraft in classroom, drill over the procedures over emergency situations like engine failures or burst strikes or foreign objects or other uneventful scenarios. It's the training that matters, and it always kicks in naturally for the pilots. Especially when you experience it for the first time, there's always that that tiny zone of what happened thing. What happened, how it happened, but it won't take long before the training kicks in, and the other guy, whether it's on your left, on your right, would make sure that you stick to your procedures. And number one is always the three major things when something goes wrong, whether it's communication failure, whether it's engine failure or whatnot, is to, number one is aviate, fly the aircraft, navigate, know where you're going. So the plane and its occupants first, and then you communicate with the tower.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, that's always the key foundations and the principles.
Sure.
In an emergency situation is aviate, navigate, and communicate.
So, fly the plane, trust your pilots, they know how to fly the plane, and then also anything on reporting, or should there be better reporting, more investigations, anything like that, or anything to add there?
I would say investigation in the respect of trying to highlight on the fault aspect of incidents, but really investigating on ascertaining whether this condition exists and persists. Reporting always comes naturally. It's part of a part of the company operations. Pilots will always make reports to the respective departments. They have to.
Right.
They have to, because they have their supervisors, their bosses to report. But sometimes, especially in my case, we had contract clients who always are. We have to submit our reports so they can understand why we had to ground the aircraft for a certain amount of days.
So another on reporting is, of course, you're going to report if you hit a bird and you had to come back and land again, and let's say you lost an engine, of course, right? Is there ever a time where you're taking off, you might hear like a bang on the plane,
Oh, yeah.
but you keep going, nothing wrong, it may be a suspected strike. Would you report that or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I mean, again, once you encounter something, especially something that you've felt during your flight phase, any phase of flight,
Sure.
It's very difficult to make sure if you look outside. There may not be any sign of impact or any damage. You can only assure that later on, if something comes up during the later phase of flight. But after takeoff, especially after takeoff, you look at your instruments, you look at your engine trends, you look at your control trends.
Sure.
It could be something that doesn't impact the engine. It could be something that impacts your flight controls. Maybe you feel some stiffness or some difficulty maneuvering.
Yeah.
That may have something to do with your flight control. Some anomalies that happen not immediately, but maybe later during the flight. Right. But if you can make sure that at least both your engines are working within acceptable parameters, then you continue on the flight. And you assess, and that really depends on whether it worsens, if it gets better.
Yeah.
And until you'll have to decide whether to continue or not.
Ziva, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Again, it was just such an interesting perspective. I feel like I hear a lot of different airport or biologist perspectives, but I don't actually hear the perspective from the sky. So I thank you so much for having your perspectives.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, at least. But as vice versa, we all, at least from pilot's point of view, we only have so much of information that we can gather and report. We also need partners such as yourself to kind of educate us
Sure.
on the prevention side. So thank you.